Well, tonight we have with us an economist who talks English. He's got a talent for making economics actually understandable. He's been with us before, and we love having him. Talking, of course, Doug Holtz-Eakin, who has held a variety of government positions, including service with the President's Council of Economic Advisors under both Republican and Democratic presidents. He's also served as director of the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, currently president of the American Action Forum. Doug, welcome back to the program. I want to jump into really what I guess is at the top of the news for everyone, and that is the election is over, thank God, and now we can start looking at, all right, what will this new administration do in economic reform? Assess for us, how big a role do you think the economy did in fact play in the way people voted?
I think it was an enormous impact on the vote, to be honest. And I don't think it's complicated. In 2021, the year that inflation really emerged, it went from 1.5% up to nearly 8% in a year, something that's only happened 3 times in our history. During that year, unemployment was very low, and people went to work every day, and they got to the end of the year, they were behind. Their wages hadn't gone up near as much as the inflation. And then they repeated that in 2022. They went to work every day, and they came home, and they were behind. And if you're working like crazy every day and getting further and further behind, you are an unhappy voter. And that just never went away. And that, I think, is the vote. It's not complicated. And taking care of that mismatch between what people are making and what they're paying is the first job for this administration.
Doug, there was a real, I think, campaign of, I'll call it misinformation. Biden administration kept saying, well, you know, inflation wasn't really high under us. It was higher under Donald Trump. Everybody knew that wasn't true. I mean, you didn't have to be an economist to understand that you could afford your groceries and your gasoline when Trump was president. Biden comes in and you can't. But the question is, what happened? Why did it change so dramatically and so rapidly? How much of it was due to the spending program of the Inflation Reduction Act, which did anything but reduce inflation?
Well, I think there are 3 things that caused the inflation. Number one, everyone knew about the pandemic, and there's a real truth to the notion that getting things across oceans and over the rails and on trucks got more expensive. That's a fact. Second thing is the Federal Reserve's policies, which worked so well in 2020 and saved us from a financial crisis, backfired in 2021 and caused a lot of the inflation. And the third is the one you mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is just a huge policy error. There was no reason for more stimulus. The economy was growing at an over 6% rate. There was no reason to toss it willy-nilly without any good design, and it really was a poorly designed program. And the result was inflation, and that was predictable. I'm not the only person who said so at the time. Prominent Democrats like Larry Summers were saying, please don't do this, Mr. President, and they did.
And the result of it was inflation that almost became a point of 20% increases in things like groceries, doubling the cost of a home because of increased interest rates as well as building materials. I mean, it just priced a lot of people right off their own share and really caused some problems. But I worry, Doug, that the Democrats didn't learn a heck of a lot out of this election. They still seem to be saying it's the voters' fault. The voters are stupid. They're morons for not electing Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. Do any of them get the message?
I worry that you're right, that they really don't get the message, because there are a couple of things going on out there that really are important. I mean, number one, they came back and they kept saying, look, people just don't understand how good this economy is. It's better than every other economy in the globe. And Americans don't sit and think, gee, am I doing better than the French right now? No, they say, my paycheck's not as big as it used to be, and I have to pay more. So I don't understand that argument. And then the other thing that they really didn't get and still don't get is the price of food is higher, and it's not gone back down. And it may not be rising as fast as it used to, but it's still higher. And every time you go, you're suffering the overhang from what happened a couple of years ago, and it doesn't make you any happier. And so they need to learn that these policy mistakes have lasting consequences. Lasting consequences for the voters. They're still feeling it, and as a result for them.
And Doug, the formula for changing this, according to Kamala Harris, was to go after, as she called them, the price gougers. In other words, let's turn the government loose on private sector businesses who are struggling to stay afloat. Let's make it even harder for them. And I'm just scratching my head thinking, do you honestly believe that one grocery store is gouging the people, because in a competitive market, if they gouge them too much, people just go across town and buy their groceries elsewhere. But nobody seemed to be able to push back enough on that. That's why I asked the question earlier, did they get it? So government is sometimes the problem. I rarely see it as the great solution. And I'd love to get your take on what can we all learn, Democrats and Republicans, from what the voters were saying?
The voters understand that the government has limits too. And the idea that you're going to turn the Justice Department loose and go after the grocers in Coshocton, Ohio, they think, no, that's a terrible idea. We don't want that. The way we keep prices low is we have competition. So tell me about the competition. And there, I think the Democrats just dropped the ball. I mean, they walked around saying everybody was anti-competition. There isn't a single firm out there in America that really competes. I don't think that passes a laugh test. And you know, they blocked the merger of Spirit Airlines 6 months ago because they were a threat to the American traveler. They went bankrupt this week. So I don't think the threat was that great. And I think the American people figured this out more than did the Democratic politicians.
I'm glad you brought up the Spirit Airlines bankruptcy, because that's going to put thousands of people out of work.
Yeah.
It's going to also create less competition in the marketplace. That results in higher ticket prices when people fly. It's like they don't understand the consequences when you start messing with a private sector company and try to micromanage them. Ultimately, it's the consumer who pays for the death of a business. Yeah. And that's what's happened this week.
It is. And I'm going to get on my high horse for a second, and I apologize. It used to be under Democrats and Republicans that the way the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission did their business is they asked the question, will the consumer be better or worse off? That was it. If you can answer that question, is they'll be better off, you do it. If it's it, or you don't. They deliberately threw that question out. The Democrats rejected it. They said, no. That's not how we're going to decide. We're going to decide on criteria that we develop. What are those criteria? Well, whatever they happen to feel that moment. And so we went from a very principled approach to this question to something that was literally without principles, and you see the consequence.
Well, we've certainly seen it, and the Democrats have seen the consequences in the election, but I'm not sure that they understood it. As the saying goes, Doug, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And I think that's kind of what's happening with the Democrats right now. Stay with us, Doug. We want to get more into this conversation. Serious food for thought, no less. But when we come back, more with Doug, and we'll talk the economy and how it may be affecting you in the next administration. We'll be right back. And we're back with Doug Holtz-Eakin, and we're talking about the proposed Department of Government Efficiency. That sounds almost like a sort of an oxymoron, government efficiency. But Doug, let's get into that. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to be tasked with trying to find ways of getting rid of government waste. You ran the CBO. You've been involved in government economics for a long, long time, trusted by both Democrats and Republicans to look at the budgets. Is it realistic that a couple of people from outside government can come in and find ways to cut the fat and the waste? I mean, they both have history of it. Elon especially cutting 80% of the workforce at X, and it seems to work every bit as efficiently as it did when he had that many more people. So I know government's a different horse to ride. Yeah. How do you see this playing out?
It is realistic to expect these two gentlemen, given their track records, to find ways to cut enormous amounts of waste and fat out of the federal budget. It's not realistic to expect them to accomplish it, because I don't see how they get the authorities. In the end, the Constitution gives Congress the power to levy taxes and to spend money. The president agrees or doesn't agree and then implements those programs. In the Constitution, we don't have Elon and we don't have Vivek, and I don't see where they get to go in and actually change the structure of government. And that's what you need to do. You need to absolutely take some things completely out. And I think you've been a governor, you've seen this in action. A lot of times the things that are built in and we see as waste, that was the objective of some legislator. They wanted that. And if you start going after their favorite program, they defend it to the teeth. And there you are.
I'm laughing because I'm kind of reliving my experience as governor when you had an idea that you thought, well, everybody will be for this. We're going to save several $1 million. And you realize what you just said. Legislators didn't want to save several $1 million. They wanted to spend several million more because
Yes.
it gave them political power back home when they could say, we funded this program. But there does seem to be such a level of waste and lack of accountability. And I want to speak specifically to the Defense Department, who recently just failed their 7th audit. And I saw an interview in which Jon Stewart, who's certainly no conservative, he's not a hardcore Republican, he's not, a Ronald Reagan / Donald Trump kind of guy, but you could tell that he was utterly frustrated that the Defense Department spokesperson laughed it off. It's like, yeah, we don't know where trillions of dollars are, but so what? We just don't know. And I'm thinking, how many people could run a business and be that completely clueless about where their money is?
No business could operate the way the Pentagon operates, and it is the number one target for really getting rid of just outright waste and mismanagement. And I don't believe they've ever had a clean audit, literally, in their history. And that's a frightening thought. And we pour trillions into the Pentagon. So if you gave them just the Department of Pentagon efficiency, they could do an enormous amount of good. And I think, anyone who looks at that budget for 10 seconds realizes that. And so I hope that's target number one. Now, I will tell you, there was another commission a while back in the Reagan era called the Grace Commission. The Grace Commission had similar mandate. It had a similar lack of powers. And, I don't think it changed the trajectory of the federal government very much. But one thing did happen that was really, really interesting. The agencies would go to the Grace Commission and say, hey, don't tell anyone I showed up, but we would really like to get rid of X, Y, and Z, and we can't. Congress won't let us. You could recommend we get rid of X, Y, and Z. And then we'll say, yeah, we'll do it, and they'll act all grudging, but you'll get a win, and we'll get rid of these programs that make no sense. And I hope that happens again.
Well, I would do too. I remember the Grace Commission, and everybody had high hopes. And it was led by some very, very thoughtful business people who approached it with great seriousness. But like you said, it kept getting stonewalled, and Congress ultimately didn't want there to be reform. And Doug, I'm going to be fair. Republicans are just as bad about this.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't a partisan thing. I watch Republicans, and they pretend they're all fiscal conservatives, but they're not. They want to spend money and send it back home and do all these special little projects. It's always like, well, that guy's project is worthless, but now my project, it's really worth saving and keeping the expenditures on. Is it possible, and this is maybe a rhetorical question, but I'll throw it out anyway, is it remotely possible that we would ever see a fiscal discipline on the part of Congress?
I think we have to. I don't think they want to. I'm with you on that. My experience as CDO was just really enlightening on that front. But the reality is that we ran a deficit last year of $1.8 trillion, and over $1 trillion of it was interest. So we are, as a nation, getting a new credit card to pay off the old credit card, and that can't work. College seniors figure this out. This country will figure it out too, and they'll have to buckle down. That's all there is to it.
Let's talk foreign policy, because there's a lot of money that has to be spent. Will the change of administration and the change of policy, whether it's the war in Ukraine or maybe it's our approach to the UN, any forecast as to how that may affect us economically and our relationship with other nations?
Well, I'll tell you, there are two things that I never thought would happen when Donald Trump was first elected. And the first was he would control all the regulations and the red tape coming out of Washington. And he did. I literally have never seen anything like it. It was an enormous success story. I expect that to happen again. And he got everyone in NATO to realize they weren't paying their fair share, and they started to pay up. I never thought anyone could do that either. So on the foreign policy front, he didn't say anything spectacular. He just said, look, you said you would pay 3% of GDP. You're not. If you don't do your share, we're not going to help you out. That's how the deal works. And it changed the nature of those relationships for the better. No one likes upsetting the status quo, but I think to have a really effective foreign policy, you have to have a working relationship with your allies, not just one on paper. And he set out to do that.
Everyone said that he would destroy NATO. The truth is he saved it by what you just said. Instead of going in and letting these people just be deadbeats. He looked them straight in the eye in public, in front of the world, and said, either you pay or we go. And by golly, they started paying. Doug, it's always a pleasure to have you with us, and I'm so grateful for the conversation. I look forward to doing it again, because once this administration gets going, there's going to be a lot of policy changes. I'd love for us to talk about them again. Are they working? Are they not? And let's see how it goes. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.